Yeah?
It's very quiet.
Yeah, he's definitely not a quiet character.
Doesn't seem to be a problem on my end.
And we are hearing you now. We're good to go.
Okay, great.
Awesome, thank you. So I had the great pleasure of meeting Howard back in the day when he had just published his book on virtual community. And this issue of Release 1.0, 1993 June, an issue I wrote about community for Esther in her newsletter. I wrote 2 issues about community back then. In the first paragraph, I basically quote Howard and he was just then publishing the book, The Virtual Community Homesteading on the Electronic Frontier. So, Howard, it's delightful to talk to you. You've invited me in to speak in your class at, I think it was Berkeley, because Howard has taught at Berkeley and Stanford. And Howard has been on this lovely, amazing quest to figure out how do we think together, how do communities work, how do we get smarter humans? There's a whole thing called pedagogy that's come out of Howard's work that we'll probably talk about a little bit. And I just wanted to pass the floor to you, Howard, to introduce yourself and to start wherever you'd like. But we're going to go back into some of the history of how we got here. Why does this matter? Who has it mattered to? And where has it gone? So pleased to begin. And in the meantime, I'm going to be wandering around in my brain, which you might, I guess we don't have it up, but at some point we'll split screen and do that. So go ahead, Howard.
So how did I get into this? In the early 1980s, I talked my way into a contractor job doing writing at the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. And I went there because of a 1977 article by Alan Kay in Scientific American that if you haven't read it, I would recommend. The article was titled Microelectronics and the Personal Computer. If you weren't at Xerox PARC back then, you didn't have what he showed on the screens, which I thought was fantastic. And then in, I guess 1982 or 1983, Time magazine made their Person of the Year, the personal computer. And it seemed from that article and from the rest of what you saw in the popular press, the personal computer was all about Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. And with all due credit to them, they were standing on the shoulders of giants who were standing on the shoulders of giants. And I was very interested in the story of how personal computers and the graphic user interface came to be, because it really, and we can get into this, Jerry, it really didn't have a lot to do with the original sponsors of computing and networking. It did not come from the US Defense Department directly, nor did it come from the computer companies, IBM, or the communication companies, AT&T. It really came from individuals who used those institutions to create tools for extending their ability to think and communicate. So I thought it was important that people know about Xerox PARC and Alan Kay and Doug Engelbart and JCR Licklider and before them, John von Neumann and Alan Turing and even Boole and Lovelace and Babbage. There's a whole lineage here, and it's interesting to me that the electronic computer was really about doing calculations for thermonuclear weapons. If you want to know more about that, there's a new book called The Man from the Future about John von Neumann, and that the internet as we know it really was not created for what it was used for. It was really transformed by people who wanted to use it to communicate in a new way. And so that's what led me to create that. And so I guess there's my introduction. I think you can look me up on Wikipedia to get all the other details.
I love that. Do you want to follow one of those sort of trails back? Do you want to go back as far as you wish and start with Licklider or before? I mean, a lot of people were motivated by Vannevar Bush's Memex. Wherever you'd like to kind of start and just bring us forward to how some of these people's influences affected what we're using right now.
Okay, I'm getting a lot of echo.
We're getting an echo here too. Keep talking and we'll troubleshoot as we go.
Okay, so I'll start with Licklider, because he really was interested in a tool for thinking. Although I'll double back to Vannevar Bush, who preceded him in 1945. So Licklider was a scientist. He studied psychoacoustics, and he complained that he spent most of his time getting into position to think. And computers in those days were batch process computers that were programmed with punch cards. So you had to submit your deck of punch cards, and then you would get a printout, and if there were problems, you had to revise the punch cards and resubmit them. He thought if he could directly communicate with the computer personally, then he might be able to turn it to the purposes of getting him into position to think much more quickly. And he wrote an article about that in 1960. Let me turn the volume down on my end here a little bit.
Sorry, Howard, we're busy.
Sorry, Howard.
The echo on this side.
Troubleshooting the echo on this side.
Jerry, you might want to try muting your mic.
Oh.
Sorry, my Zoom is totally
Are we
on.
okay now?
I had muted it earlier, but it's
Sounds good. So he wrote this article called Man-Computer Symbiosis, and the title is kind of self-explanatory. He thought that someday humans would be able to think along with computers in a kind of symbiotic relationship. And the importance of that article was that when the Sputnik went up in 1957 and the Defense Department created ARPA, as it was known then, they had a small, really not very significant office called the Information Processing Techniques Office. And because he had done some war work, Licklider was given the job of heading up that office. And fortunately, Licklider had heard about Doug Engelbart, who had been trying for years to get people to pay attention to his idea that computers could be used to augment human intellect. So I think it's important to understand that the mindset everywhere was that computers were for doing scientific calculations and for business data processing. And what Engelbart was proposing, that people use computers and communicate through screens, that they would be able to solve problems together and to augment their ability to think. It was really called science fiction by everybody from the computer science department at UC Berkeley to Hewlett-Packard. But finally he got he realized that people weren't hearing him because they didn't have the right framework for thinking about it. And I think that has a lot to do with what's going on today, because I think we're beginning to have the right framework for thinking about an integrated toolkit of tools for thought. And he really wrote about an integrated toolkit. So he wrote his paper on augmenting human intellect. I'm sure that everybody in this conference has read that paper. When I was teaching, I assigned it to students because it was not only because it was prescient, but because he broke down what he meant by augmenting human intellect. What are the parts of what we do when we think that could be automated, and how would automating it free our brains to think more effectively? So Licklider funded Engelbart in his research, and then of course he did his 1968 mother of all demos that changed everything. So that's kind of the truncated history there. I will say, and maybe we should talk about this a little bit more, that one of the important points in Engelbart's paper was that he talked about an integrated system of humans using language, artifacts, methodology, and training. And over the years that I knew Engelbart, he reiterated that the artifacts had become literally millions or billions of times more powerful. The computer that was used for the mother of all demos was really pathetically underpowered compared to today. It's probably devoted as much RAM as an icon on a smartphone today. But the language, the methodology, and the training really has not caught up with that. And he really tried. He had a psychologist as part of his staff. The interesting part of that, I think, is that the psychologist was James Fadiman, who's now known for his work on psychedelic microdosing. And he had this idea of bootstrapping, that they would create tools that would help them think and communicate, and they would use those tools to build better tools, and that organizations could do the same thing organizationally by having a team that raced ahead and tried new tools. Jerry, I don't know how much you want me to get into the weeds on this, or whether you want to go somewhere else with
this
that.
This is a really rich area. There's a bunch of good soil to turn in this area. So I wanted to ask you, what things that Doug envisioned are commonplace that we take for granted today, and then which ones didn't make it to today, and why do you think? Like what failed? Because there's a whole bunch of Doug's vision that he gave us kind of in 1968 that I think we're not using. We haven't internalized. It hasn't been manifest as software, I guess.
Well, you know, all the things that we take for granted as personal computers, the hypertext, using the mouse to click on links, using computers to write with. That's what got me interested in the whole thing, what led me to Park in the first place. Multimedia took a long time before video began being added to computer screens again, although he did it in his 1968 demo. A shared notebook for people working on projects was a big part of it. But I think, well, I think one of the things that he tried to get going with organizations that really never took off, and as far as I know really isn't happening today, was that he talked about A work, B work, and C work. So A work was the service or the product that your enterprise created, and B work was the part of your enterprise that worked to improve your ability to create that product. But C work was improving your ability to improve. And that required a team. I forget what he called them. It's probably in your brain somewhere. He thought that there should be a kind of a skunkworks-like team who went ahead and tried new things and went ahead of the rest of the company, and then introduced to the B work people, the people who were trying to create their widgets or their service more effectively, to tell them how they could do what they were doing more effectively. And that really hasn't happened. And I think, you know, one thing that we've seen in the evolution of Silicon Valley is that it's difficult to upgrade the way an organization does things, particularly if they're a successful organization. It's easier to go out and create your own, and I think that's the way that things have evolved. And it's nice that these days that we have in our hands not just devices for communicating and thinking better, but really they're innovation factories. You can go off and create a little app that does a big thing. That wasn't something that was happening back in his time. Of course, little apps make for an ecosystem. How does that all fit together? And he was really talking about an integrated toolkit. So I'm seeing now that there are note-taking apps and rapid learning apps and knowledge apps, and what we really need to see in the future is some way of integrating these things into a toolkit, integrated thinking environments. And you know, I see that you've got even think on there, and of course you're using the brain. And one thing that I've been thinking about is that there are relationships that really need to be made more clear to the tools for thought community among knowledge tools, thinking tools, and learning tools. And I did use the brain and even think. I used them both when I wrote my last book, but they are ways, to me, they're ways of organizing things that I know or that I have learned. And there's a way of using that visualization of what I know to think. But Jerry, would you think of the brain as a thinking tool or as a knowledge tool that you apply some process to help your thinking?
What's funny is I think of the brain as like Photoshop for ideas and stuff. And I put on it the things that for me, past the threshold are of, is this worth remembering? And the fact that sometimes it's just like this actor acted in this movie, this person wrote this book. So I was just on the thought of Stephen Berlin Johnson's books. And here are I'm not sure it's all of his titles, but here's the Ghost Map. And the Ghost Map is about the 1984 cholera outbreak in Soho. Here's cholera, which is a bacterial disease, so are these. These are kind of nouns in relationship, but then I also use the brain for opinions and for other kinds of narratives. And the fact that I can put these things side by side in the same tool is very important to me, because if I had a tool that was like a database search that listed books and authors, but I couldn't add to it or annotate it or link into it, that would feel like I was only getting like half the game going. So in one sense, the brain's flexibility is one of the things that attracted me to it really early.
So let's talk about a couple of the things that it does. Obviously, it externalizes your memory. And that was something that struck me. When I was at Park, they had a library there, and they had their own publications in these blue journals that they published. And I remember reading one about the advent of the graphic user interface, and I underlined a phrase there, which was that by putting items on a screen, you were creating a visual cache for your memory. You know, there's that famous, the magic number 7 plus or minus 2, famous scientific paper written in the 1950s that demonstrates that we can only hold about 7 items in our immediate memory at the same time, plus or minus 2. But of course, if we have them all laid out in front of us and the relationships between them, visually designated, then we can then think at a higher level of abstraction. So I think that, number one, it's a visual cache for memory, but here, the reason I ask my students to do mind mapping is because when you see items of knowledge or things that you're thinking about laid out visually, and you try to use that visual environment to show the network of connections between them, what are the most important connections, what are the most central nodes, you're really looking at a whole framework of thought that is difficult to hold in your mind at the same time. So you've got this externalization of your memory. You have the ability to use a kind of visualization of relationships going on, and then when you actually animate it with the brain, you can traverse entire trees of relationships that are related to what you're talking about. And I wrote books before I had these tools, and I had my whole office covered with whiteboards and Post-its and 3x5 cards, and that served a good purpose. On that table behind me that's now filled with art and electronics tools, I had stacks of notes, and on top of each stack I had a 3x5 card that was a brief index to those notes, and then I could move them around in proximity to each other. So I think this ability to externalize, to think with items, symbolic items outside of our brain is something that certainly you can do without computer tools. But as you can see by the way things are changing here, that you can speed that up and broaden it in ways that you can't do with just physical objects.
Mm-hmm. I just want to draw attention to a phrase that Arthur Brock kind of showed me years ago, expressive capacity. And it applies really nicely to a bunch of things. And you can think of like different tools have different kinds of expressive capacity. And a potentially apocryphal story I heard years ago was when AutoCAD was new, it didn't have a whole lot of features, but architecture firms started adopting it like crazy. And so housing for that period is missing a bunch of features that people would have liked to put in because the software didn't have that expressive capacity. Then later you start to get more complicated things, and then later you get all kinds of complicated buildings because I'm forgetting the architect's name, who basically invents software that lets you do very complex curves and then assemble them on site. And so and when you're busy shopping for a tool and trying to figure out what you want to use for your thinking, we haven't had any kind of taxonomy or ontology here to describe to you what do we mean by tools for thinking. We haven't drawn a boundary around the category very much. And some things are just simple note-taking tools. And you could argue that when you're taking notes, you're thinking. And that's pretty much true. But for me, note-taking tools without any other sort of things are just writing tools. So the moment you start adding backlinks or semantic tagging or some kind of visualization or something else like that, now we're sort of talking in this territory. But it's really hard when you're shopping for a tool to figure out how am I going to use it and what's it missing or what does it have that I'm going to find invaluable. And what we have a little bit of now is we have some sort of manic people on YouTube who are saying, here's my workflow, and I use this and this and this and this, and take my course and build a second brain or whatever. And it's like, some of these things are awesome and the people are great. Some of them are really rigid. And it's like, follow my workflow. And if you don't use multicolors, you're not making a mind map. There's a Tony Bazan video online I found. And he's like a mind mapper. He's like, if you don't use colors, it's not a mind. I'm like, what? Seriously. So we have this, we need to have more of a conversation about how the tools work. The tools would be nice if they were more open and more interoperable in different ways so that you could switch from tool to tool. I have a thought in my brain for current representatives because I'm too curious about politics. This should be a database. This is a scroll bar down here. This should clearly be a database lookup. The brain doesn't really do database lookup. So there's a bunch of people under here who I'm certain are no longer in Congress. And I move them out when I can't manually, because everything you're seeing in here I put in by hand. Man, I could sure use a power tool at this turn for just this little purpose. So just to play that back to the visions that people have had about what these tools might be, and Howard, to your peregrinations through all of this, because you've sent your classes out to explore these tools in depth and report back and use them. Like, how did that play out for you? How does that, what did you learn from those journeys?
Well, I think not just from those journeys, and I'll talk about the pedagogical aspects of it, but I think throughout this history, we see that people who use tools, certain tools, find things to do with them that the people who created them or sold them or deployed them really didn't have in mind. And I think the internet is a good example in the sense that there's a myth that the internet was created as a bomb-proof communication medium. Actually, packet switching was created for that purpose, and packet switching was adopted for the internet, not really for that reason. The ARPA researchers under Licklider, who were trying to create computers that they could use screens with, that they could communicate with directly, they were scattered all over, and they wanted to be able to use the data on one of their computers to be processed with a program on a remote computer. So they connected these computers, and the people who were operating them, the researchers, began using it to communicate with each other about things like science fiction. The SF Lovers list was one of the first things that they did. And to their credit, the people who were running this project, the ARPANET project, Licklider and Bob Taylor, and by the way, Bob Taylor is really a lesser known but really important person in this story. And if you want to get the story from him, he did a great video with John Markoff at the University of Texas at Austin.
UT Austin, yeah.
Some years ago.
You mentioned it. You mentioned it in one of your newsletters right here. This is a link to the post on Patreon where you wrote about this video.
Yeah. So anyway, Licklider and Taylor.
This is how I take notes, people. Go ahead. Sorry.
Instead of telling their programmers get back to work and enough of this communicating about science fiction, they recognized that what was emerging was a new communication medium that someday would be very big. In fact, Licklider called it the intergalactic network. And they wrote a paper, I think it was 1968 or 1978, called The Computer as a Communication Device. So the users really were the ones who turned the internet into a communication medium. And I think, I think about Stack Exchange. If you're a coder and you've got a problem, there's someone out there who may have solved that problem. How did programmers work before then? I don't know. And I think that if there was something like a Stack Exchange, some kind of community for people who are making tools for thought, then we would be able to bring in some of what they're learning from users. And I think that it's part of the HLAMT part that the methodology and the training really ought to be emergent. And I'll just quickly note that one of the things that I learned teaching was that the more agency you can give to the learners, including responsibility for teaching each other, the more engaged they are. That the model of the expert who broadcasts knowledge that's stored by the learners really isn't as useful as a group or a community of people who are learning together. I called it co-learning, and I think that that's one of the things that the technology we're using now enables us to do, no matter where you are in the world.
I'm looking in my brain at a piece out of your book, NetSmart, about the 5 literacies of social media, and attention, collaboration, network awareness, participation, crap detection. And I kind of wanted to swing a little bit toward crap detection and toward what's happening in the world right now and how we might help each other sort of swim and filter our way through the bullshit wave that's been hitting us. Feel free to pick that up any way or place you'd like. But I think you care a lot about this, and you've been working hard to figure out how to teach people how to detect BS and do something about it.
I think that's become a wicked problem. When I first started writing about it, it was more than 10 years ago, and as I wrote in the book, it was because when my daughter was in middle school, pre-Google, she started using search engines to do her homework, and I had to sit down with her and explain that up until now, when a teacher assigned a book, there was an editor and a publisher and a librarian and a teacher who all acted as gatekeepers, as filters to guarantee the authority of that text. Now, 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, more like closer to 20 years ago, I was saying you can now ask any question anywhere and get a million answers in a second, but it's now up to you to determine what the authority of the text is. Is it good information, bad information, misinformation, or disinformation? So I felt that the problem of bad information was a matter of literacy, that people didn't really know how to check things out. And a lot of the research that was done at that time kind of reiterated that many college students thought, well, if it's on Google, it must be true. I don't think that people feel that way anymore, but in the arms race between the critical ability to sift the good information from the bad information versus the ability to micro-target sophisticated misinformation computationally, that the forces of misinformation and disinformation are really far ahead, and that certainly in the last 10 years or the last 20 years, we have not seen any kind of education, whether they're in educational institutions or parents who are having a large-scale effect on teaching their kids when they first get online, or teaching older people how it is that you could search for a medical condition you have and not kill yourself, or how it is you can not be susceptible to political disinformation. I think we're all falling victim to that, and that's why I call it a wicked problem, because on the one hand you've got the technology that makes it possible to create, and the technology is advancing so fast, fake info, and the technological means to micro-target that information to particular people, particular kinds of people. So I don't know the answer to that, but I think in that SMART what I proposed was some kind of combination of social and algorithmic filtering. That is, if we were talking about tools for thought, I would have a list of people, and you would be at the top of that list. And if I wanted to find out what people thought about tools for thought, or legal or medical, whatever other thing, then I would curate my own lists of trusted experts, and there would be some algorithmic method of using that social network to filter materials, so that or test materials. It has yet to be really done, but why not? Of course, that assumes that you understand enough and you care enough to and know enough experts to curate your own list. But of course, you might trust somebody else, your mom and dad or your teacher, and you might be able to take their list and adopt that. And in the book, I did talk about some things, and Mike Caulfield has created something called SIFT, which essentially says if you're trying to check out the veracity of a web page, get off that web page and do one of the things that I suggested was, why don't you search on the name of the author and see what others think. So it's a problem. It's an educational problem, and it's a technology problem, and it's a social problem, and it's a huge business problem, because there's huge business in misinforming people.
It is, alas, a profitable enterprise. I'm remembering, just as we're talking, that probably the first place I heard of you or saw you around was on the Well, where you were all over the place, and there was this lovely forum on the Well called Experts on the Well, and you could kind of drop a question about anything into Experts on the Well, and there were a bunch of people that would come and sort of see what was asked, and then people would answer brilliantly, because it was just a magnet. It was a bonfire for the moths of information who would show up and contribute and help fix things. And that was in a more innocent world on one little platform. It seems like a time far, far ago. But we've forgotten how well and how much we can rely on other humans for disambiguating the good stuff from the bad. And then at the same moment, humans are the contagion vectors for conspiracy theories and all the other kinds of stuff that we're worried about right now. It's like, whoa, that was humans. It didn't happen all by itself. Thank you for indulging me to hog Howard's time so far. I'd like to invite you to raise your hands and ask some questions of Howard. And there's a question right there in the middle. If you'll please say your names before you ask your question.
Hi, how are you? My name is Omid. Pleasure to meet you, and that was super rad. I learned so much stuff.
I just figured out what happened. There was a prompt that showed up that said, unmute yourself, and I did, and that was a bad idea.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
All right, no worries. So I wanted to check with you and see what you think of this in regards to misinformation and disinformation. Specifically politically, what's your views on like the human mind itself kind of looking for kind of self-reinforcing loops? Let's say you have a specific political view and then or a personal view, and you want that to be reinforced subconsciously. You might not know about it consciously. What do you think the role of things like that are with the actual functionalities of the human brain linked into what people are putting out there and how to be able to educate about that? How is it possible to educate on something where the viewpoints of the person teaching could be influenced by it, in a sense, is what I'm saying?
I'm not an expert on that. I think what you're talking about is, one of the things you're talking about is confirmation bias, that we are more attuned to evidence that supports what we already believe. And I think also the role of emotion and emotional attachment to some kind of tribal belief, that these are rather outside of this rational fact-based system that we're talking about. And I don't really know the answer to that. I know that James Fishkin at Stanford has been doing the research for quite a while all over the world, including in China, on what he calls deliberative polling, where he gets a wide-ranging group together, wide-ranging in the sense that they have a lot of different opinions about a subject, even something as volatile as immigration, for example. So immigration in Texas, and he would get a group of people. He would poll them on their thoughts and beliefs about the subject, and then would have groups of experts talking and debating and taking questions from the audience, and then he would have the group itself, the audience, talk with each other, and then he would do polling again, and showed that people's opinions shifted towards the factual when they do that. So I believe on the one hand there are some powerful human prejudices that really keep us from learning things that we may not have been trained to learn, but on the other hand, that doesn't mean that we'll never discover ways to work around that. So again, I think we have to think that there are strong connections between the artifacts, the language, the methodology, and the training, and I think within that is understanding the psychology of the individual and the psychology of the group. And I think that the group is all important in that we really are not disembodied brains thinking alone. That when we think we're building on things that we've learned from other people. To go back to your well example, experts on the well still exists. I was there this morning.
Oh, come on.
The well exists. Experts on the well still has enough that if you check in every day, it's hard to keep up with it. But that was one of the first things that got me excited about life online, was I found that if people asked a question and I knew the answer, it didn't cost me anything to give the answer out, even though I didn't know that person and they had never done anything for me. And it turns out that if I have a question, that I'll get answers. And that in fact, my rough calculation was that for everything I put out for free, I would get a return of 10 times that. When I was trying to figure this out in the early 1990s, why would people give answers to strangers? I asked a sociologist by the name of Mark Smith, and he just instantly said, social capital, knowledge capital, and communion. And I think all of those things are important. We probably don't have time to get into expanding on what all of those things mean, but I think understanding the dynamics of the social aspect of knowledge sharing is really essential for tools for thought. It's not just tools for individuals, tools for, and I think, again, Stack Exchange is a very simple example of that. But you know, everybody here knows that you have a community that you turn to.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to build on what you just said, Howard, because I had the same, I'm not going to click on the unmute myself button now. I just got the prompt again. I had the same experience as you did with Experts on the Well. Had no idea it's still a thriving community. Then I had this other funny experience on the Well, which was Blair Newman, who was a very frequent poster and kind of an abrasive personality, committed suicide. But a week before he committed suicide, he committed virtual suicide by scribbling all of his posts in the Well. He went everywhere and deleted himself. And I just tripped across this. I never interacted with Blair, but I saw this happening. And then what I saw was everybody on the Well started reconstructing his posts, because these were the days when you saved your log journal. It was like text was scrolling off the screen. You saved those files. They went back, they found Blair's posts, and they created a thread to rebuild it. I then discovered somehow that my mom and Blair Newman's mom were bridge buddies. I have no idea how that came up. I printed the tribute thread and passed it to Blair's mom. And I don't know what happened after that, I have no idea, but that's when I got this feeling like, oh, this is really serious human business. This is, and in particular, Blair's virtual then physical suicide and the linkages there. I realized that this was like really important stuff going on. Next question. Way in the back.
I see
I
him.
might have to throw the mic.
Sorry, making you work for it. My name's Chip Kennedy. I just had a question. You were talking about authority figures going away and the democratization of information on the internet and training the individual to learn. Is there a place for authority figures in the future without going back to gatekeeping? And what do you think those look like? Are they human? Are they AI? How do we build those systems of authority in a democratic way?
Well, boy, authority figure is such is so loaded a term. I talked about the authority of the text. How much can you trust the information from a particular text, and how much can you trust the information from a particular person? I encountered this in teaching. We don't really have time to get into that, unfortunately, but you know, the model is the college professor is the authority on the subject, and is going to kind of dictate the truth that you're going to transcribe. I found that and of course I was not teaching mathematics. There's always a solid answer to question there. I was teaching about social media issues and social media literacies. That in fact learners were more engaged and learned better if they were thrown a question and tried to figure it out for themselves and tried to figure out where the authorities were and why they were authoritative. So I think again, this is kind of social in the sense that I talked about SIFT, getting off the website and seeing what other people have to say. So authority is conferred by other people. Now, of course, you have to understand something about what the prejudices of the people who recommend a particular authority are. So, yes, there's a place for authority. Yes, there's a place for questioning authority. I think the questioning is so much more important now that we don't have those authoritative gatekeepers of information, and that we have all of this information that we need to find our way through. I think we need to find our way through it together, and that maybe more of a community idea of authority.
There's also kind of this, there's a lot of people who've gotten really good at distraction or obfuscation. It's a little bit like what illusionists do. They make you look over here while they're doing something over here. But I have a strange favorite example. Murray Rothbard, the head of the Mises Institute, so like a diehard libertarian with a huge audience, wrote a piece called Down with Primitivism, a thorough critique of Polanyi. And it turns out that The Great Transformation, written by Karl Polanyi, is one of my favorite books. So I read the critique. And the critique is a 6-page letter to his base that basically says, don't ever read this book. It is a terrible book. It is doing this and this, and it accuses Polanyi of all these crimes, all of which Rothbard is committing in this letter. It's like Darvo. It's like flipping. It's really, really interesting and weird. We're seeing that, and that was years ago. That the letter that I just pointed to. I don't have the date written in here, but it's way long ago. Now we have superconducting medium of communication and people who have studied really hard how humans make decisions, social bonds, all of that kind of stuff, and are using it against us. And then the business model of the major platforms where all these communications are happening is one that rewards it for addiction and basically spinning people into more extreme positions, which we haven't fixed, right? So, next question.
You know, while you're
Please say your name.
waiting a question.
I'm Blake.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so I'm trying to think how to phrase this, but in regards to creating a second brain or even like tools for thought, you know, our brain operates on emotion as well. How do you think how do you think emotion, or should emotion play into the developing of like these second brains or like these tools for thought?
Well, I think, boy, I don't know the answer to that question, but I think that understanding some of our emotional biases is important. Two researchers at Stanford, Byron Reeves and Cliff Nass, wrote a book called The Media Equation, which I would recommend to anyone who's designing computer tools. They did standard psychological tests with people, and they substituted for the other person in the psychology experiment, they substituted a computer or a cartoon rendition of a person or a computer voice, and their finding was that people attribute human qualities to things that computers do, and that we have not evolved to make a distinction between a synthetic voice and the voice of a real human, or a representation, even a cartoon representation of a person and a real person. And I've recently seen people kind of falling into that trap. So I think understand some of our weaknesses can lead us to find ways to work around them. I think first step is understanding them. There's a problem with teaching critical thinking. If you're going to teach people to question authority, then they're going to question their teachers and they're going to question their parents. And a lot of teachers and a lot of parents and a lot of politicians don't like that. If you try to introduce it in elementary school, as my mother did as an elementary school teacher, it is identified as a communist plot. So you need to be able to think. You need to be able to think critically in order to understand this world we're talking about now. But how do you learn it? Who teaches it?
Thank you. Great question. Next question. We have 10 more minutes in this session.
Hi, Howard. My name is Michael, and first of all, I wanted to thank you for your book, Tools of Thought. It's been hugely instrumental giving a sense of the history of all this, which you gave a small recap on today. One of the things that I noticed when you were giving your example of when you used analog methods to write your books, with the stacks of notepaper around you, is that there were two pieces there where there was both a spatiality to what you were doing and a tactility to interacting with those pieces. And I wanted to know, do you have thoughts on how important each of those elements are to our ability to think, and to what extent we are going to be held back until we can more fully reproduce those in our digital tools?
You know, there's a fellow at MIT Media Lab by the name of Hiroshi Ishii who puts computational capabilities into physical objects that you can manipulate. So you can move blocks around and it will change the landscape, the computer landscape. Or you can take the top off a bottle and music will sound. So, you know, there's a book I would recommend to everybody here that just recently came out called The Extended Mind. And part of, I can't really give you the whole story about the extended mind, but part of that is that there's a lot of research that shows that teachers who use gestures, their students learn more effectively when they do that. And so our bodies and manipulating physical objects in space are ways of thinking, but we don't really see them done computationally. So I think that there's a lot to that. And you know, you sort of get there by using your mouse to move things around on a screen, but I think we can get into 3 dimensions with that, whether you use VR or whether you endow objects with computational capabilities. I think that that's a whole realm to be explored.
And sometimes a computer could slow you down and say, how are you feeling right now? Like it doesn't have to be people in like, there's many different ways to bring different sort of dimensions, perceptions, senses, somatic processes into thinking in different ways. But also the system can slow you down and ask you to reflect in different ways. And then over time it can tell you how that went. That's useful. But we're not really using a lot of those kinds of things, right? And for me, sometimes when you hear something that's really different and interesting, your throat clenches, your heart tightens up and starts racing. You have a physiological response to undesired information that sounds pretty good. That's very interesting. Can we find that moment and call it out, and figure out how to sort of slow it down, go deeper into it, et cetera. And I'm not seeing a lot of experimentation on that. I'm hoping somebody at the Media Lab is working on it or somewhere else, because there's lots of people working on psychology plus computing, for sure.
Oh, well, some of the research cited in that book, it's by Annie Murphy Paul, The Extended Mind. There are people who are aware of their heartbeat and people who are not aware of their heartbeat. And they did a controlled experiment with stockbrokers and demonstrated that people who are aware of the stockbrokers who are aware of their heartbeat made more lucrative financial decisions than stockbrokers who are not aware of their heartbeat. So proprioception, being aware of what's happening in your body, certainly does have an effect on your decision making.
I can hear the sound of Fitbits being ordered for brokers right now. Next question, we have a couple more minutes left. 1 or 2 questions?
Howard, you've been around some of the pioneering sort of computer people over the years, some of the originals. I'm curious, in your experience, what's the most psychoactive experience you've had with a computer around some of these folks?
Psychoactive experience I've had around a computer. Well, you know, I'll just have to say that the first time it's a long story, but I wanted to be able to use a computer to write with. I talked my way into Xerox PARC and I got access to their Alto computer and I got a 5 megabyte hard disk. It was about the size of a maximum pizza box. Being able to move a paragraph around without retyping the whole page, I just can't tell you. It was blissful. If you lived in the olden days and you marked up a page and then you had to retype it and you're trying to do that for a whole book, that's a whole lot of work. Just that experience convinced me that this was not just a tool for manipulating information. It was something I could think better with. And that's one of the things that Engelbart said, was that if you can automate a lower level process, then that frees up space for higher level things. And I think that's the same thing that computer programming does with abstraction.
Has a computer experience ever brought you any closer to an altered state that would resemble a psychoactive substance or something else? Like, have you gotten anywhere near that?
No, but when I was researching what people did online, really early, late 1980s, there was a group of, I think they were teenagers, who took psychedelics and chatted with each other. they had a list they called Leary L, L-E-R-I-L. I wonder if it still exists. But no, that's, I do remember that after maybe a 30-year hiatus, about 5 years ago, I did take LSD again, and I came into my office and I put on Google Earth, and I did have a realization at that moment that what Google was doing was building an AI. I just feel it becoming. That's about the closest.
So I think that's a yes. I like that. I'm glad that came back to you, Howard. I think we have room for one more question, right there.
Hi, Howard. My name is Shuo. I want to ask, like, a lot of the tools for thinking seem to be going around for like a text and like papers, writings. When reading like about Alan Kay's idea, he talked a lot about like building models, doing simulations for the things that are not like a pure text format. What are your things? What your thoughts about like tools for thoughts for like doing something like that, like a modeling or simulations or some more abstract ideas?
Well, there's a strong connection between our intellect kind of intelligence and our sense of space and our ability to manipulate space. And if you think about it, IQ tests, part of that is how do you visualize rotating renderings of three-dimensional objects. So I think there's a lot to that. I'm really not big on VR. I haven't seen people do with VR what VR can uniquely do, but I think if you could give attributes to physical appearing objects in simulated space, you might be able to do what I talked about earlier, and what we're seeing with the brain, which is to have a more sophisticated cache for your memory, but also a way of manipulating the relationships between different concepts. I don't know. I'm really just brainstorming here, but I think it's certainly something to be explored.
It's really interesting, all the different explorations that are going on about virtual reality, augmented reality, extended reality, what have you, many of which feel like they were done in 1980 and haven't advanced a lot, which is kind of strange and sad, but a lot of people sort of are reinventing the same settings and scenarios. When Mark Zuckerberg does his demo of we're renaming the company Meta, and here's what it's going to look like, I'm like, that smells a lot like Second Life to me. Or before, right? And there were all these little avatar worlds, and it doesn't look much more interesting or competent or whatever else, and these things are running a lot faster and can do more. So what's up with that? And I bought the domain thebetterverse.org because I was like, between the crypto version of the metaverse and the Zuckerberg version of the metaverse, I'm not happy. So what would a betterverse look like? So, Howard, this has been wonderful. It is delightful to see you again, and lovely to thread your stories together and to hear how these things came together. Thank you from everybody here for being with us. Really, really appreciate it. And now we need to reset for the demos, I believe. So there's like just a 1-minute break. Don't leave.
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started with some very interesting demos. So over the next hour, we have about 5 different products coming up to show what they've been working on. Up first, we have Davey with Plexus, which is the tool we've been using in the back for people to connect their thoughts with one another. Do keep in mind that we won't have time for Q&A in the demo session because of the number of demos that we're trying to get through, but we will have a short break after all the demos for you guys to chat with the people who are building. So yeah, without further ado, first up is Davey.
That's all it's on. Yeah, I'm not really projecting anything.
Hi, everybody. My name is Davey Morse. I go by he and his pronouns. I'm the founder of Plexus. At Plexus, we're building, well, you'll will see in a second when you're connected in a new kind of way. But I think first, I just wanted to mention this question that Neil, can you all hear me back there?
The web. From the mic, okay, sorry. I can talk more quietly. So Neil and I, the conference organizer and I, were talking last week about what it's going to take for all of the stuff that we're building here, like tools for thought, connection-making technology, what it's going to take for all of this technology to have an impact out there on people who aren't always, who aren't coders, who aren't researchers, who aren't productivity experts, just on non-technical people who are our friends and family and in our lives. Like what is that going to take? What kind of applications is that going to look like? A lot of what we've been building with Plexus has been inspired by that question, and so before I show you in 5 minutes what we're building now, I want to talk a little bit about how that question's come up for us before. In 2018, I was a student at Williams College in Massachusetts, and I built a notes tool that worked a whole lot like Roam Research. It helped me make connections between scattered pages. And it was really helpful for me, really helpful. But when I showed my friends, they thought it was trash. My friends at the time were writers and artists. They were dancers and philosophers. And so though they thought the wiki-style connections between pages were cool, especially in the context of school, they didn't really have any interest in using special grammar to take notes, in a new way. And so that stuck with me, and I ended up taking a few months and then building a new kind of notes tool that again worked like Roam, but made automatic connections and didn't require any special grammar. There's no double brackets. You just would type, the computer would parse your words and understand what you were saying. And that was cool. It's really helpful for me now. It's been helpful for a lot of students and writers and researchers. But again, when I showed my friends, they thought it was cooler, and yet I could see that it didn't really matter to them in the context of their lives. See, my friends were dealing with all kinds of issues at the time that were beyond the scope of their notes. They were dealing with issues that related to mental health, they related to physical health, they related to their work, their relationships, their lives. And in all of those situations, while I think I had a hunch that the solution might have to do with finding the right connection, it was clear to me that it wasn't a connection between their notes. And to illustrate, so one friend in particular, Noah, a good friend of mine, was dealing with mono-like symptoms for the better course of a year and didn't really know what he was going through. He saw multiple doctors, he was multiply misdiagnosed, and ended up just feeling like he didn't know what the next step was or where to go. And it's a kind of feeling that I think we've all probably felt at some point or another in our lives, like when you're dealing with something unique and you don't really know anyone who's dealt with it before, and you don't really know what the next step is. It's not a good feeling. And with Noah, we happened to get lucky because I was meeting with a tech founder who also happened to have been dealing with mono-like symptoms for a year. And she also didn't know what was going on for a year until she met the right doctor, and she did. In her case, it was like mold toxicity. And so immediately after talking with Claire, I connected them, and it changed the course of Noah's struggle. It was a substantive, meaningful connection with a person across Noah's extended community that knew what he was going through and had dealt with that problem before. And that made me take a step back and be like, oh, well, all of this technology that we're building in the context of notes, automatic connection making between different thoughts, that doesn't have to be just between one person's thoughts, within one person's base of the knowledge that they've already recorded. And so at Plexus now, we're building a new kind of online community. We're building a shared brain, which some of you might have seen a little bit in the back. And actually today, we're launching the first shared brain for the knowledge tech community. We're actually launching it now for all of you at this conference. So, thanks. Well, you might want to wait until it totally crashes. But so I would invite all of you right now to take out your phones if you have them. Never done this before, so we'll see. Okay. And when you do, you can either scan this QR code right here if it fits, or you can go to render.plexus.earth in Safari or Chrome or whatever your preferred mobile browser is. Render.plexus.earth. Looks like the QR code is the main method. And when you do, you should be brought to a page with a big button that says Get Started. So it looks like some of you got in there already. Render.plexus.earth. Earth, yeah, funky. And then, yeah, and so when you're there, you'll see this big blue Get Started button. You can click that. You'll be brought through a Google sign-in flow. If you're comfortable, you should do that. And then when you get to, you'll be asked for your first name, and then you'll get to this blank page. And when you do, just hold on for a second. Maybe give me a thumbs up if you have. Cool, a few people. Wait, like 10, 15 more seconds? If not, I can show you after as well. Cool. Okay, all right, so when you're at this blank page, I just want to invite you all to meditate for a second. Don't do anything on the blank page. Just think for a second about why you're here today. Like, why you're at this Render conference. What you're looking to get out of it. Like, what kind of people you're hoping to meet. What kind of interests you're hoping to connect with people through. After you think about that for a second, I would invite all of you to type a comment there, type a thought there, that it follows this form, that says, I'm at the Render conference because blank. I'm at the Render conference because blank, and fill in the blank for you, and try to be specific about it. And then once you're done, press activate, but give you 30 seconds. Okay, so hopefully some of you got the chance to press activate already. And when you do, oh sorry, I keep forgetting. When you do, Plexus will do something a little magical. I'm going to press activate here and see what happens. It'll take a second, and then should, I'll see about this, maybe I'll type it again. Should connect you with the most relevant thought from the rest of your community. I'm actually going to try one more time. If this doesn't work, that's totally fine, but. Yeah, let's see about this. Okay, shoot, so I'm not sure if it's working for me. Is this happening for everyone else too? It's working for you guys? Okay, all right, I'm glad it's working for you. So my hope here is that when you find a thought that's related to yours, I'm going to go back to a previous one for a second. So maybe I'll use someone else's example. Terry, or yeah, Mark, I don't know to put you on the spot here, but okay, never mind. I'll shut this down for a second, but I think if it's working for you all, my hope is that you can take a second to look at the most related thought that appeared. Hopefully Plexus found something that someone else posted here that's really related to you and to your struggles. And to the thing that you're trying to deal with. And when it does, you'll have this option to either press a check mark to say, oh yeah, that is related and I want to collect that, or press an X mark. And there will even be an option to email that person at the top of the thought. So anyway, when it's working, really think this is how the world should work. Like meaningful, substantive connections with people across your community should not be left up to chance. Even though in the status quo, they sort of are, because right now, to find that kind of connection, for Noah to find that kind of connection, you needed a mutual friend in between, you need to be at the same institution, you need to run into that person at a conference, or you need to post to all of your followers on Twitter all at once, and hope, and maybe be vulnerable about it, and then hope that the right person comes across your thought. They come across your thought and then reach out to you. That is a crazy string of events to occur. And I think when this is working, it's sort of the microcosm of something new on the internet, where you don't have to rely on chance, where these substantive, meaningful connections don't just have to happen rarely, but can happen routinely. And I think when you start to see that that's possible with this connection-making technology that a lot of us are exposed to and working on, you start to walk around public spaces, especially in a city like New York, and feel a little crazy, because in parks, in subway cars, at conferences, you start to see all the possible connections that could be made between pairs of people, where at least one of those people's lives would be changed because it was a connection based on a shared struggle or shared interest or with a thought partner. you start to see all of these potential connections, and you also start to see that they aren't happening. And it's crazy, and in every circumstance, in my friends and family's lives, not just technical people's lives, like, that's the kind of thing that people are looking for. And so, just last things quickly. I want to invite you all to use the shared space if it's helpful to you. It's yours. You can post thoughts and connect through them throughout the rest of the day and even for the next week. We'll keep it up and probably much longer. Because at the worst, it'll be a sort of shared record of what's gone on today at the Render conference at BetaWorks. A slightly better outcome is that it helps you meet the person across this community who you needed to meet the most. That's one thing. The other thing is that we're running a few pilots right now for other kinds of communities. And so if you're part of one where you feel like the community exists online and it's overwhelmed by a feed, or people are like not really engaging with each other as much as you think they'd want to, I'm happy to set up a shared brain for you, and we can talk about that. That's the second thing. The last thing is that I'm looking for people who are ambitious and empathetic to help me think about this project and work on it with me. And so if you are thinking about like all of this technology, but are thinking in particular about how we can use it to try to help connect people and try to create the next iteration of online forums that I think are going to replace Reddit and Discord and Slack. If nothing else is clear from this talk, like it should be clear that like the thing I want most is to connect with people who are thinking about the same problems as me. So yeah, thanks guys. Appreciate it.
All right, up next we have Alice, who's going to be demoing Recollect for us.
I just want to give Davey a thank you. I know it's hard to give a live demo, so I really appreciate that you did that. I'm also going to give a live demo, so let's hope this works. So make this bigger for you. So I'm Alice. I'm the founder and CEO of Recollect. I'm really excited today to get to talk to you about Recollect. At Recollect, we're building what we call an AI-powered creative assistant. Really what we're trying to do is build a better bridge between you and your machines that exploits the way that machines work best, but also honors the way that your mind works, so that you can spend more of your time doing the things that you're actually good at as a human, which are things like ideating, creating, and sharing ideas with others. Some of our teammates are here today, Mihai and Jonathan, and Andre's here too, and Brendan is on our live stream. I encourage you to find them, find me, talk to us later. I'm going to give you a little background on me so that the rest of this will make sense. My background originally, I was an academic, I was in cognitive neuroscience, and then I spent about a decade doing machine learning work. So a lot of our product is really informed by that. And what I'll show you is that we're using advanced machine learning to sort of augment our memory to build this extended mind of sorts. And so I won't get into the technical details of how that works here, but I'm also very happy to talk to people later about it. As we've been in this Tools for Thought space, we've been thinking about some of the problems that people encounter. And one of the biggest problems we found is that people don't have access to their ideas and their thoughts when they're ready to do something with them. And we're all about trying to get people to do things with their ideas. One of the reasons for that is that we didn't actually evolve for this amount of information that we have access to today. So people try to do things like solve this by creating better tools to capture their ideas, to store that information. But pretty quickly, I mean, we have this unlimited storage space on these machines. Now we run into this problem that we don't really know where that information is. So we can't really reason about endless amounts of information that's stuck behind this little rectangle here. So we've extended our minds in a sense that we have this huge memory, but finding that information is really hard. At Recollect, we kind of sidestep this where problem. We don't have people put their information in a specific place, and I'll show you that in a second. So you have the sort of fixing this problem of where, but then what you put in is the next problem that we faced. So what you want to store is actually a pretty hard problem as well. You have to think about what your future self will want. So today, if I'm reading something, I can solve this by taking a note for myself. I could add bookmarks to something. But the what is really a hard thing to predict, and we try to do all of these things to fix that problem. But again, we're overwhelmed. We're dealing with this anxiety around this overwhelm. So we're afraid we're going to lose information. We think that we may miss out on information. So to soothe that, we have, like I said, we have bookmarks, we have making notes about things, but we're really still running into this fundamental problem where we've left these digital breadcrumbs for ourselves, which are great. But the breadcrumbs over time, we have to rely again on our future self to remember what we've recorded, to record it correctly, to tag it correctly, and to be able to find it again later. So we really end up with this too many breadcrumbs problem, in my view. And what I mean by that is that we have too many tags, we have too many folders, we have piles of information, we're constantly trying to tend to this information. It's really, frankly, quite distracting. At Recollect, we, again, kind of sidestep this issue, I'm sorry to say, or not sorry to say. So we don't have really any explicit tagging or organizing of information in that sense. So we want to automatically bring all of this information in for you. We don't want you to have to make the choice of what to bring in all of the time again. Unlimited storage is fantastic. So we can rely and trust ourselves that we have this information in now. So the information isn't lost, but the question then is, like, can I find it? Can my future self find this information? And this is really hard. Again, it relies on a really fallible human memory to go and trace these breadcrumbs back and try to find this information. You know, my past self is frankly a jerk in the way that I've stored this information. I can't tell you the number of times I've typed what I think are magic words into a million search boxes in all of the applications I use, just trying to find the thing that I know that I put somewhere. So the way we solve for this at Recollect is by using more natural human language. So we use full sentences. We really want to have things be more of a conversation between my past self that consumed something or wrote a note and my future self or my current self today. So we're trying to solve some of these problems around, you know, where does your information go? We don't want you to be anxious that you didn't get it. We want you to be able to find it when you need it. And we want you to be able to do all of that without doing much work, frankly. We want you to focus on the things that you do best as a human. So the things you do best are putting your ideas together, synthesizing information, making those connections, and creating something that's worthy of sharing with other people. So if we do our job, you can focus on doing those things, and then you can start to play with your ideas. You can start to put them together. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and show you a demo of Recollect and how that actually works in practice. Let me see if I can minimize this. Excellent. Okay. So Recollect has two components to it. I'm checking my time. And one of them is the web app that you're seeing here. And the other is our web extension. Our web extension you can think of as the main way that we get information into Recollect on an ongoing basis. One thing I'll show you, it's very easy to get information in, but we have this notion of automatically bringing things in when you have a source that you like to visit often. The majority of the time you spend in Recollect is really doing your ideating and creating. So we can bring in the articles you're consuming, we can bring in tweets you're consuming, and then here are your ideas. For me, my ideas are things that might be things that I think about for a long period of time, or they might be shorter. So I went ahead and made an idea for myself for this conference. Oh, the sizing is off on the screen. Okay. So what you'll see here on the left-hand side is a rich text editor. So a lot of our early private alpha customers are using this to write longer form content. So they might be writing a newsletter or a blog post. I've just put a few of the description of the conference here so you can see it. On the right-hand side is what we call our playground view. So our playground view, which I'll switch to now, I'm not used to not having an external keyboard, is really this infinite canvas. So it goes on forever. And these cards here that you're seeing in this stack, this is something that I've worked on for a little bit to get ready. The ones in white are the notes that I've made. So when you open a new idea, you can add some notes, some quick thoughts. The ones in yellow are things that I've recalled. So all of the information that comes into Recollect from the web extension or from your onboarding is connected in the back end with our machine learning models. Again, we're trying to get as close as we can to the way your mind would connect this information. That's all connected for you, and then when you recall, these yellow cards are what comes back. I recommend when people use the product that they sort of work through their ideas and then they write a summary here. Today, for the demo, I'm going to work through a new idea with you and do something exciting that we haven't done before, so hopefully that part works. So here is this sort of start of a thread of thinking for me around augmented cognition, something I'm very excited about. So to do that recall, so to bring back the information for myself, I can highlight any sentence in Recollect. This also works on the web, so if I'm reading something online, I can do the same thing. And I click Recall. And so again, what that's doing is taking all of my information in Recollect that's just gone into this giant pile, theoretically, on the back end, and it's connecting at the sentence level. And what I get back is at the sentence level as well. So at this sort of nucleus of thought here, I get results that are my data. So hopefully these make sense to a broader audience here. I tried to pick something that was near and dear to everyone's heart. So I can start to look through my results this way. I've got a Twitter thread, I've got notes from another idea that I made, so I can start to automatically connect my thinking that I've had before and other ideas to my thinking now. If I'm interested in learning more, I can open this expanded view. This is really helpful for people that use our product right now that maybe had a bunch of open tabs that they automatically had Recollect connect or collect, but they haven't read them. Even if you have read them, I'm not going to remember everything that's in this Wikipedia article on thought. So you can peruse the results. If you like results, you can keep them. That'll create one of those yellow cards. You can also, and I'll show you how the Twitter threads end up looking, you can also grab things that weren't explicitly recalled by Recollect, but they're there in the context of the thing that was. So here, this is what was recalled, but there's all this other information that Ev is talking about here. So if I'm scrolling through this and I find something that I want to keep, I can highlight that and keep that to the board. As I mentioned, it also brings in my notes, so this is another idea board, and it'll show me where it is in the context of that idea board. I can open it if I want to. I won't right now in the interest of time. So once all of that stuff is collected here, I can come back to my playground, and so these are now yellow cards that I can add. I can do whatever I want with them, really. I can add notes to them, I can start to organize them, I can start to put them into stacks here. And I can also do another recall if I like. So like I said, it works on any text. So if I wanted to go a little bit farther on this, I could do another recall here. And while that's happening, I will grab this stack, good job, and then add it to this. So I can keep going really ad nauseum here. It gets the first one. And adding things to this thread of thought. Our goal, though, really is not to have people rabbit holing forever. We really want them to have some sort of output. So this is a thing that we have not, this is very, very new. So we haven't launched this to everybody that's even in the private beta yet, but we want them to be able to get their ideas out really quickly. So I showed you that document view. We also want to be able to sort of reorder these thoughts here. So I'm gonna reorder this. You can think of this as like my ultimate idea here, even though it's probably not. And then I'm gonna try something here live and see if it works. Oops. You'll notice for each of these cards, we have a word and character count here. That's for people that are writing, but also for people that want to get this information out earlier than later, so on something like Twitter. So if I grab this, let me make sure this is the right one before I tweet it to the world. I can click this, and then I can directly, yay, put that onto Twitter. Very good at tweeting. So what you've seen here is I've ingested a lot of my information. I haven't had to do the work of storing it, tagging it, organizing it in any way. It comes back to me in the moment that I need it, and it's based on what I'm writing at the time. I can start to synthesize those ideas, put them together, and now I can actually get them out really quickly. There's lots more to show you, and I'm happy to talk during the break, but I hope this gives you an idea for what we're building. Please find us online or on our website or after this. Thank you.
I was looking for HDMI and we got this svelte little connector here, so whole different thing. And I need to reset my screen just a wee bit. Now, you have already, because I've been kind of note-taking in public here, you're already kind of familiar with the brain. So what I'd like to do is show you a couple more things and then just take questions and see what you're thinking. And I want to preface this by saying, I got addicted to this thing because it does a few simple things that I can't find any other tool that does this, including, I've only ever had one brain data file. So you're looking at the file that I started 24.5 years ago. Hard to do with other tools and not have a big ball of twine, but this is like pretty organized, right? So here's my thought for this event. It's under sort of Think Camp, which is the larger project. I connected it to mapping tools for thinking. Here are some of the people who are attending, including Joe Plotkin from Broadway.net, who goes, he's sitting right there. Oh, sorry. I haven't talked with Joe in forever, and so that was his old association. So for events, I then connect up who did I meet, who was new, who was there, who was old, who were the speakers, and then that links me back to them. But let's go to, I set up just a couple things to show you. One of them was like really, really simple. Here's an actor, a familiar actor named Brad Pitt. He's been in these movies, The Big Short, Bullet Train, Moneyball, et cetera, et cetera. So I put actors under their movies. I put authors above their books. I decided to do it that way. The brain didn't tell me to, and I'm really happy with that choice because as you see, it plays out at scale when you start wandering through this space. So here's the movie, The Big Short. Here's the book, The Big Short. Here's Michael Lewis, I will read anything Michael Lewis writes because I just love his way of sort of analyzing problems. He's married to Tabitha Soren, who was an MTV VJ way back in the day. Any of you from the 90s might remember this. And here's MTV, which is owned, I don't even know if it's owned by Viacom anymore, but everything's basically deeply intertwined. If I go back for 1 second to The Big Short, I have a little quirk that I created, which is just my way of doing movies. I always put the director out to the left with this jump thought. And in the brain, you can have things above, below, or to the left. That's one of the magical, quirky things the brain does. It's not a big circle. Your eye can't parse things that are in a big circle. It's not a rubber band diagram. You can't figure out what's where. It's definitely not 3D. It's really, really hard to fly through 3D info. And so this thing just happens to have worked for me. And so here's Adam McKay. And it turns out that he's also the director of Anchorman, Don't Look Up, Talladega Nights, the other guys, and Vice, right? And Don't Look Up is like I have it connected to what will cause people to change their minds about climate change, which is a damn serious question these days, right? And I have that connected to mitigating climate change, articles about all this kind of stuff on climate change. So that's one thing I wanted to show you was sort of something normal like an actor in a movie. Then I waved to this thought earlier. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I have a thought where I collect up insights from using this tool. What has worked? And here is, for example, a thought, user interface things the brain gets right. And some of the things that are simple that I use are there. Then I wanted to show you how I use this in my daily workflow. So I wrote myself, add a thought to a news article. So in this morning's New York Times, there were two comically juxtaposed articles that weren't, I don't think they were related in there, but sorry for the feral hogs out there, but apparently they're pretty tasty to Australian crocodiles, right? So I'm pretty sure I have feral hogs in my brain. I should have put them under invasive species because I have invasive species. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the URL from the New York Times article over into my brain. Now, alas, for the New York Times, the brain isn't smart enough to pull up. There's some kind of interference, but it doesn't pull in the title. And so I pull in the title just by copy-pasting it in. And then, because I like to know who wrote stuff, Anthony Ham is a writer here. I'm going to put Anthony Ham above the piece that he wrote, because that's how I do it. And look, I had an Anthony Ham in my brain before, and he wrote this other article about saber-toothed cats. And I'm gonna attach him to New York Times reporters, because I do that once a person has written several articles. And this is all the New York Times reporters I have. This is just the A's. See the scroll bar? This is just the first name to Andrew. And if I keep going, so here's Chris Buckley, who wrote these articles. And this doesn't mean I've read every one of these articles. It just means these articles pass the threshold of is it worth putting somewhere in here, and then I put it somewhere next to what it means or why it's there. It's like, it's all contextual, and the context is just self-drawn, self-made, which is one of the reasons why I really like this thing. So we've got the pigs and the feral hogs and actually invasive species, and I have harvesting invasive species. Actually, this is probably not right for that. But the other article I wanted to put in was, let me just go back to invasive species for a second. Right next to it on the home page, but not related, was Death Valley's invasive donkeys have become cat food. I know. So the big cats in Death Valley are like, what am I going to eat? Guess what? Here's a donkey wandering along. I'm going to drag that, add it to invasive species. Go over here, do the same little dance because New York Times, just to show you. And then, boom, add Asher Elbine. I don't know. Name's sort of familiar. I probably have Asher. So paste. Hey, look, there's Asher. And Asher I know for writing these 3 other articles, and I'm going to connect Asher to New York Times reporters, which is floating by on the breadcrumbs down below. So that's just how to add content, articles. Oh, big mistake. Death Valley must connect this to donkeys. Donkeys, burros, and here we go. Lots of stuff on donkeys, how a donkey became my running partner. Nasreddin, the storyteller from Arab cultures, was smuggling donkeys. That was his sort of job. And if you want to go read stories by Nasreddin, I don't have many in here, but you know, Sufi stories often start with Nasreddin. Nasreddin did this, and here's a book about him, which was quoted in this article about the Kinevin framework. So everything is deeply intertwined. And then the last thing I wrote to myself was, so here's my TFT, brain, show an opinion. And here I pre-linked 2 opinions that I really care about. So one of them I did a couple of screencast videos that I posted to YouTube about the global financial crisis of 2008-2009. And my thesis on what happened is snip. We snipped long-term relationships that were holding together the financial system. Lots of different people in lots of different ways. So Glass-Steagall was broken when travelers wanted to eat Citibank. And so they destroyed Glass-Steagall, which separated banks from being actual savings institutions that were trustworthy, and said, hey, everybody, go play with money, and which all of a sudden increased the fragility of the system. The broker, so the AAA ratings, basically the ratings houses became transaction mills. That's Fitch, Moody's, and Standard & Poor's. How they're still alive, I don't understand. When Enron goes under, so does Andersen, their accountancy. Not so in this case. In fact, the ratings mills are still working exactly as they used to. Like, we didn't fix anything. So these are opinions, not just actors in movies or books and whatever. And my ability to mix and match these things and tell a story here is great. The problem is, I usually tell stories over in Prezi. And raise your hand if you've ever known Prezi or seen Prezi. Thank you. That was my go-to tool until their last do-over, their last makeover, and they basically lobotomized themselves. So I can't use Prezi anymore, so I tell stories here. And the problem with telling stories in the brain is that all the information I don't really want to show you is visible on screen at the same time as the story I'm trying to weave through. So that doesn't work really well. So I'd love there to be a better tool that does this kind of thing. And just as I was about to ask for questions, we have one right there if we can get a microphone to you. Thank you. Pause for 15 seconds. No, behind you. Directly behind you. You'll be next, though. Oh, okay.
Hi, my name's Heidi Cohn. You say that you put in information either above and to the left? What
Yes.
happened?
Up, down, or left.
Up, down, or left, but how come you have so much information on the right?
Oh, so here's Standard & Poor's on the left. I'm going to move it down here. Boom, there's Standard & Poor's. I'm going to move it back to the left. Boom, it's on the left.
But you have still have a whole list along the right side.
Oh, so the stuff on the right is a little confusing. I can turn that part off. These are called sibling thoughts. They're children of a common parent. So they're the children of all these parent thoughts up here. They just show up here because sometimes it's really, really handy to see next door. And I've got 23 seconds on the timer, alas. Same question for the colors? Oh, the default color in the brain is white. So everything that's white is just how the brain shows up for me, the way I format it. I use yellow for collections of things. So yellow means, look here, there's a lot of stuff here. And I use this purple color, lilac color, for opinions. So I only use 2 colors, yellow to attract attention to a collection, and purple to say, hey, this is me saying, this is what I believe. And I'm really eager and we'll talk about this later when I talk with Esther, I'm really eager, and this is a bad way to say it, to have idea sex with other people who've done something with whatever tool they have to back up why they think about what they believe. So I think we need to externalize as much as we can our belief systems and the foundations for them, which I've been lucky enough to do. It's in some rudimentary amateur form here. I want us to do a lot more of that. So thank you very much. Next demo.
Cool. Yeah, idea sex. I don't really have a segue for that. Up next, we have Linus Lee, who's going to be talking to us about sentence gradients. I don't really know what that means, but it's a good thing he's demoing so we can all learn. So yeah, Linus.
Okay, cool. I'd actually forgotten that I told Neil that there was a title called Sentence Gradients. I guess that still works. Cool. So, let me pull out my extremely makeshift notes here in case I forget what to say about any of this. So unlike some of the other demos that we've seen so far, and that I'm sure we'll see more of, what I'm demoing isn't really a product so much as just kind of a result of some thought experiments that I've had. So it's more of a window into an interesting kind of future that I've been thinking about. And so rather than looking at it as a thing that you will use today or tomorrow, think of it more as, can you still hear me? Okay. Think of it more as there's kind of a future that I'm imagining, and this is just kind of a narrow, broken, sort of haphazard window into some interesting things that I've been thinking about the future of how we think and how we communicate ideas. And the vision of the future that I'm interested in specifically is about the future of how we work with knowledge, work with information, which is kind of broad, but how we work with information in terms of how we write them down and record them, how we share them, how we work with them more directly, like operating on them, disagreeing with them, contending with them, using them for evidence, argumentation, things like that. And the sort of medium, the instrument that we use for a lot of that today is the most fundamental tool for thought is language, right? And so I'm really interested in how can language evolve? How can we augment and improve language as the sort of most fundamental tool that underlies all of these other tools for thoughts that we've been looking at? Language is really great. It's gotten us really far in the last few millennia. But language has language in the way that it exists today, like all of the sort of spoken natural languages that we have, they have a few shortcomings if you look at it from a pure user interface perspective. Language is really just a user interface to ideas, and they have a few shortcomings. The first is that it's not really tuned or designed for the human visual system. The human visual perception system is really good at certain things. It's really good at visualizing or recognizing faces, recognizing certain kinds of objects, navigating spaces. It's not really good at looking at a page full of text and figuring out what it's about. You have to read each word individually. It's kind of a time-consuming process. It's hard to learn. And language, the words that we use, the written words, also has the property that two things may be saying something very similar, two sentences may be saying something very similar, but they may look completely different. Or two sentences that look very similar and have all the same words may be saying something completely different, depending on the context and depending on the word order and things like that. And in general, all of this is about language is a really discontinuous interface to ideas. So what I mean by that is that similar things can look different, different things can look similar, and you can't operate directly on words to do things. So if you wanted to disagree with a sentence, or if you wanted to make a sentence more aggressive or more extreme or something like that, you can't work on the words in the way that you can work on numbers and math to do operations and ideas. You have to understand the text and then think about it and then write a new sentence. But there are other kinds of information where we've come up with better interfaces or better representations for ideas. So an example is color. We have words for colors. We have red and orange and yellow and these words. And those words are not super expressive. We have to memorize all of them and we have to imagine what they are. But we also have other more quantified notation representation for colors. We have RGB values, we have CMYK. And the interesting thing about these numerical representations is that we can operate on them. So we can take an RGB value and make it brighter, make it dimmer. We can write algorithms that work on these things that us transform colors. And so I got really curious about how can we have representations for thoughts, for ideas, for information that's a little better than language in some of these areas where it's more continuous, more expressive, and more importantly, it lets us operate on these ideas in the way that we can operate on RGB values for colors. So that's the pretext. The demo starts with a text editor. This is a sentence about what we're doing. It's a community of builders and thinkers scattered in New York City, blah, 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 thinking about better tools for thought. So let's say you're writing something, and maybe I wrote this, and I'm going to sort of explore in my mind a little bit around this idea. So I select this, and I have this interesting interface. So imagine this as sort of a small crop of the space that's this like latent space of sentences and meaning that are close to this sentence. And then down here, I have a few other sort of anchor points. So the way to visualize this, conceptualize this, is this sentence is this dot. And then these sentences that are totally unrelated at the bottom. One is about falling in love at a cafe. The other is about, it's from a Wikipedia article about a failed infrastructure project. It's a California high-speed rail, if anyone's familiar with that tragedy. So what I can do here is I can just take this sentence, this dot, and just sort of interpolate it towards these other sentences. So I can take the sentence, and the first sentences are like around the cafe. So I start here, and initially it's sort of about the same thing. It's about like people gathered and building stuff. And then as I move towards the right, the end of the x-axis, it's going to talk more about like meeting people at a cafe. Yeah, so I met some people at a cafe. It's not really about love anymore. If you go all the way to the extreme, like you're going to start like falling in love with people. More down here, it's more about tools for thought. So you can see we've somehow encoded this sentence and all these sentences into just sort of numerical representations, this kind of continuous space of ideas. And we can start to navigate it this way. We can do this with this y-axis too. So if we go up, maybe all of this is live. So, oh yeah, so now it's talking about like raising money. There's some financial difficulties with this meeting apparently. And then you go down, and then we have fewer financial difficulties. So this is kind of a basic demo of like, okay, now you can just move around in this idea space. But it turns out there's actually a lot of interesting structure in this idea space. So I don't want to get too deep into the specifics of the technicalities because we don't have a lot of time. But the technical word for what I've constructed here and what I'm using here is called an embedding, which is drawn out from a language model. And so these spaces have some interesting semantic structure. For example, instead of interpolating towards this sentence, there's a ton of other examples. But the interesting one, for interest of time, is like I can actually make the x-axis like a spectrum from like really liking something to really hating something. And then I take this sentence and I go towards the right. And it's kind of a positive sentence. Shared ideas. There was already a pretty positive sentence, so it doesn't change that much. But if you go towards the negative end, hopefully we'll see. Someone's criticizing something, someone's disappointed. So, yeah. So this is interesting because now we're not just sort of blindly moving around. We've actually taken this sort of semantically meaningful thing, which is like positivity and negativity, and we've turned it into this vector in this space, this transformation that you can apply just mathematically in this space to change the meaning of a sentence. We also have like slow to fast, or just numbers going up and down. And so on this side, I believe is like things being fast, so just a quick day of gathering. On this side, so they met for over a year, a week-long retreat. So you can apply these, you can turn a lot of these sort of analogies and ideas into just movements in this semantic space. And I think that's super fascinating. And I think what that points to, and we can play with it, if you find me later, we can play with it more. But to me, this is exciting because it's not just, in this state, it's kind of an interesting tool for writers to like edit and revise their writing in a higher level, more semantically meaningful way. But what this really implies to me is that there is a future path where instead of working with ideas by like serializing them into our brain and then thinking really hard and then writing them down, we can have mechanical aids that are really finely controllable, where we can have specific kinds of algorithms or processes or transformations or operations on thoughts that we just describe as movements in the semantic space. And then we say, yeah, my process for brainstorming is that I apply this step to my thought and then apply this step to my thought. And then the next step up from that, maybe in a far future, is we can have notations that are less about explicit ideas like this, and more about encapsulating both ideas and the transformations we can apply to them. So in the same way that we can do like long division using Arabic numerals, maybe we'd be able to do really complex kind of thinking processes and just sort of work them out on paper because the notation encodes the mathematics of how thoughts move in this space. And that's what I've been thinking about most recently, is this sort of like algebra on ideas, algebra of thoughts that you can start to do once you have a really good encoding of ideas in this kind of embedding space. And yeah, I think that's sort of the exciting potential that I've been ruminating on. And so we have 17 seconds here, so I'll end with this. This is Doug Engelbart's, one of my favorite quotes from his paper on augmenting human intellect. And he talks about this, there's this really inspiring thing at the end here where he talks about tools that don't just allow us to be more productive and get more done, but actually allow us to find solutions to problems that before seemed insoluble, and in general think thoughts that before couldn't be thought. And I think one of the ways that we can get there is by projecting our thoughts into this more kind of continuous, more expressive, more smoothly manipulatable space, and then trying to find interesting thoughts in between the thoughts that we've already thought and outside of the space of thoughts we've thought before. And so if we interpolate here, maybe we'll get something interesting. Yeah, okay, not a manufacturer, let's go back. Okay, we have a community of engineers trying to build tools to invent better capabilities and tools for thought. So yeah, I think this is kind of interesting. Hope you enjoyed it.
And our final demo for the day will be the Readwise team again, showing us what they've been cooking up. So yeah, Tristan and Daniel, you guys are up next.
It's on the other side. I'm going to be like the hype man in the background. Dan's going to demo.
All right, are we on? All right, so earlier today we mentioned we've been working on our own reading application. This is it. Who here has heard of Superhuman, the email client? All right, sweet. So when we started, you could think of just a very simple metaphor of basically we're building the Superhuman of Instapaper, or the Instapaper, if those two were combined. So this is the web app right here. I'll full screen it. You can do everything with keyboard shortcuts. You can save all your articles here. And the first pain that we're really trying to solve with this reading app, this is from our manifesto, is if you look at our users, they've all built this very complex workflow where they have all these different reading apps funneling into their note-taking app. So you might have Kindle for ebooks, you might have Instapaper for articles, you have your email client for your newsletters, you've got podcasts, you've got Medium.
PDFs
where knowledge goes to die. So we're trying to help people bring everything into one place, and that was kind of our first objective. This isn't a very mainstream pain point, but it definitely is in our early adopter community, in our power user community. So the reading app that we have here first has support for your articles. And you can save these just like you would with Instapaper using a browser extension. I'm going to tap O here and open this article in another tab. If you've taken a highlight inside the app, it'll overlay on top of the native article using our browser extension. Let me go into it. I should also mention that this is cross-platform, meaning that it works on both web, mobile, tablet, and it's all local first, so you get the benefits of a very responsive, speedy app, but you also get the convenience of being able to read wherever you want to. Most people don't read on their desktop, but if you do, we have done one initial innovation, which is keyboard-based reading. So I'm using my arrow keys here. If I want to take a highlight, I can just tap H to highlight. I can hide these sidebars if they're getting in the way. I can start taking a note and really have marginalia here. And that's the keyboard-based reading experience. In addition to articles, we also have support for ebooks. Right now we just support EPUBs. You can also forward emails to this if you've got like a long form email. If you have newsletters,
We have a separate section of the app called the feed. This is where you combine your RSS, your newsletters, even Twitter. These are all things that are pushed to you, and you can come into your feed and decide, yeah, this actually feels like worth reading, so I'm going to move it to my inbox. This I want to read later. And you can start to process and really combine your RSS workflow with your read it later workflow. We've also got support for PDFs. I've thrown out my back recently, so I'm reading a book on how to solve back pain. You can't read with the keyboard-based reading experience with a PDF just because of the limitations of the format, but you can take highlights, and you can see those highlights and sync them with Readwise, sync them with your note-taking app, just like any other document. We also have support for Twitter threads. Twitter threads have really emerged as kind of a new form of blog post. It's not very convenient to read a Twitter thread in Twitter for a lot of people, so we will compile it into a cohesive document here that you can highlight. Like Tristan mentioned earlier, you can highlight across tweets. These also will go into your note-taking app. And then finally, you've got a lot of customization here. So all of these things right here are what we call views. It's kind of our concept of a folder. It's a dynamic folder. So here you can see I've created one called Short Reads, which is any document that is less than 10 minutes, and in my Later tab. But this really enables you to both organize and to create your own workflow. So for example, let's say I wanted to read up on this conference. I might search for all documents in my library containing beta works. All right, fortunately that found 2 documents, and maybe I will also want to look for all documents authored by Gordon Brander. Now I'm up to 36. Maybe also from the domain the Cephist. Now I'm up to 56. It's like, all right, this is good, but that's too many documents. I don't have enough time. So I'm going to look for just the short one. Minutes less than 5. So now I'm down to 24. I'll save this. And now it's here in my left sidebar. I can move this up. Maybe I'll split this on triage status so I can start to apply a workflow to it. And yeah, you can see that there's one in inbox. Maybe I'll read this later. Come here to my archive. Move these all to my inbox. And you can get a sense of how we're trying to create the reading app for power users.
Yeah. Oh, Dan, you didn't show search then.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, got full text search. We will be combining our full text search with our filtering, but right now they're separate concepts. We also have a command palette, dark mode, of course. Anything else?
Yeah, so maybe we went backwards. Like, I guess this is the demo, and then, you know, I guess we have 4 minutes left, so we can go over kind of why we decided to build this, what kind of problems it solves, how our users kind of pulled it out of us, and so on. So, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, or we could just take questions.
Yeah, and anybody have any questions?
I was going to ask, is the parsing good enough that you guys trust it, so when you're reading in this app, you never find yourself double-checking the actual web page to make sure nothing was missed?
Yeah, so we have a benchmark of the top 200 articles from Instapaper and Pocket in Readwise, and we're already past Instapaper and Pocket in terms of parsing. That said, we definitely do have parsing errors from time to time, so we really rely on our browser extension. Actually, this is going to be a good one. That's kind of our exception handler, so you can just highlight on the native page.
But yeah, we trust it. I feel like there's going to be, you know, you save like a landing page or something, and you save like a dynamic app. You want to go back to the original page, but if it's something you're actually reading, like an article, it seems to be pretty good.
Oh yeah, one thing I didn't demo, which I forgot, which is really important, is you can highlight images, which we don't know of any other reading app that enables you to do that, which is really nice.
Yeah.
I have a question. How are you, can you share anything about how you're mapping the highlights back to the website and the extension? Are you using any of the Chrome kind of addressing hash links, whatever they're called, I forget.
We're not using the thing that Chrome is using, but similar. We have like an XPath. We have like the highlight text. It's like really, really hard. Like we have a brilliant engineer who's basically been working on this to kind of share the highlights and sync them across the original web page and the parse clean view. It's like months and months and months of work. It was really hard, but we've kind of been in private beta with this project for over a year now, and we're finally kind of getting those dividends of these abstractions fitting together and kind of having compounding value.
Do you guys archive all of the HTML? Like, what happens if the page goes down? Do I still have it locally?
Yes, you do. That's right.
That's huge value.
If people want to get access to the beta in the cloud.
It's still in private beta, but just email us, hello@readwise.io. They'll forward that email to me, and I'll flip the feature flag for you.
Yeah, we've kind of been working hard. Dan has probably onboarded hundreds of users himself manually. We've kind of been going nice and slow and steady. In this private beta, it's a massive product, you know. And that really is the main pain, is trying to solve that instead of having to use 5 different apps to manage all your reading. You can just use one. But the thing they don't tell you about an all-in-one app is that you're actually building like 5 apps in one. So it's been a long process. But now we're finally kind of ramping up the private beta, starting to invite people automatically, build out onboarding. So yeah.
How would the experience work for like cascading tabs, which I'll find, like I'm reading something and then there's all these links in that thing and I'm opening up tabs, like how does that work?
Yeah, we don't have this on web yet, but we do on mobile, where whenever you tap a link on mobile, you'll be able to save those to your account. That's also the intent of this section right here called links, which will parse out all the forward links and the backlinks in your library. So you can kind of start to see that network documents in your library.
Totally. Like Gordon mentioned, like what if the web is a tool for thought? We're definitely really big on that. In fact, we kind of realized like 6 months into this, we were actually building a web browser, which is cool. And it comes with a lot of that stuff. And you know, we were able to ease into it a little bit because we have this browser extension. So where we don't have full web browser capabilities, we can kind of fill in what we need overlaid on the original web pages. But yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, well, hopefully you guys enjoyed the demos. Right now we have a little break period, so we will reconvene back at 4:15 in 15 minutes for our next session. Thanks.